Hello everyone, good to be talking to you again. It has been a bit of a break for me. It was nice to take a week off and not think about school at all, but I am back and I do owe you a couple of videos, and the two next ones I'm going to do are both going to be about Hotline Miami movement style. We're going to go over the basics today, and then there's this little advanced thing that I will talk about in a second that we'll hold off for a second video because I don't want this one to be too long. Anyway, I want to start off just by breaking down how this movement works, and then from there we'll go into, I'll just show off the code for what it entails. I'm not going to go through and type it out all in front of you because that would just take forever and I'll make a million mistakes. So I'm hoping everything is working in GameMaker, but for now let's just break down this code and then we'll hop into GameMaker and cover it all. Alright, so if you've never played Hotline Miami before, I recommend it. It's a good game. I don't know much about number 2, the sequel, but the first one's definitely good. You move by WASD and then you use the mouse to look. It's kind of dizzying a bit, so I'll try to slow that down. And you do attack too. We're not going to cover that, but attacking is completely dependent on the mouse cursor, and WASD is strictly for movement. So looking and attacking is with the mouse, and the movement is with WASD. We're going to focus on just WASD and the mouse. We're not going to get this fancy camera stuff going, at least not for a little while, but we'll at least get the movement and the looking and the facing in the right direction. There are a couple of weird things that I want to point out because when I went through this to try and duplicate it, I noticed a couple of things I hadn't noticed when I initially played it, just because, you know, think about that stuff when you're not really developing games. Now that I am, or at least teaching how to develop games, there are some things that you start to notice. The first one is that the opposite keys don't cancel each other out. So I'm trying to hit the keys hard so you can hear what I'm doing, but if you remember our platform game, if you held down the left and right keys at the same time, that basically equaled to no movement. So that would stop you from moving, which, depending on the game you're making, that might be desirable, but for this, that's not what happens, and I kind of like it, because I know the way I use WASD is if I was to switch directions, there's going to be a brief period of time where both my fingers are pressing the left and right keys, or the up and down. Actually, I typically don't do that just because the way WASD is laid out. A and D are ideal here, but rolling from A to D or D to A, there is this brief second where I'm holding both keys at the same time. So ideally, I think I would like the movement style less if I had to pause, or if my character paused while I was switching directions. So this way, it's very fluid, and it's consistent too, which means that if I'm holding down D and hit A, not until I let go of D will I move in the other direction. And the same thing with the other way. If I'm holding down A, it's not until I actually let go of it do I switch directions. So despite the fact that I'm holding down the opposite key, I keep moving, and I will keep moving until I let go. All right, that's a nice little, it's subtle, but it's nice, and you don't notice it, especially if you're not looking for it. So that's something we definitely want to get into the game, because we want to duplicate this as much as possible, and that's a good movement. It's a good movement strategy, and it's much better than that pause thing that you have in the platformer. The mask is consistent. That's what I got written down here. And oh, here we go. This dealing with masks is always kind of funny with animation. I'm not a pro at it yet, but if you notice that no matter which way I'm looking, and I'm holding up, so I'm pressing up against the wall, no matter which way I'm turning, I'm not getting any closer to the wall. As I turn, like, my shoulders go through it, and then now there's a little bit of space between. Now the shoulders are through it again. The mask is consistent. I know some people are trying to do precise mask collisions and things like that, and I've done some reading on this, and what you want to do is you want to keep a consistent mask just so you don't have a headache, because if I had precise collisions on, well, I'd be bumping into the wall now. So what do you do at this point? If the player wants to keep turning, well, what do you do when the shoulder hits the wall? Do you push him away from it? Do you prevent him from moving? It becomes this programming nightmare of like what exactly you want to do, because yeah, you want to mimic real life to a certain extent, but this isn't real life. You're controlling with the mouse and keyboard, so you need a little bit of forgiveness in there. And on top of that, with collisions, especially with enemy objects, you want a little bit of give because no one is playing these games perfectly. So having a little bit of, like this shoulder right here, I'm not going to be able to put my mouse over the shoulder. I'm willing to bet that if a bullet hits his shoulder, it doesn't do anything. It's not considered a hit. So you get a little bit of cushion as far as, you know, what counts as a hit. So this way, the game's not incredibly difficult. You can see some bad games where the hitboxes are just way too large, where they're bigger than the character, and it becomes frustrating because there's things happening that you don't think should be happening. So if you're going to do anything, err on the side of a smaller hitbox. And if you have to, and this is perfect case, a smaller hitbox, because obviously the shoulders don't count. It's pretty much just his head and maybe a little bit more outside of that. So we want to work on having a consistent mask, a consistent hitbox, and we want to get the opposite keys that don't cancel out. And there is one more thing. The rolling around corners, which I'm not going to do this video, but I just want to show you anyway. Oh, I missed. There it is. There's this nice little thing where if you hit a corner, like if you're trying to hug a wall, but you kind of miss just a little bit, the game will actually push you around the corner for you. It's a nice little feature. It's surprisingly simple to put in, but it requires doing something we haven't really touched on before, or at least stuff we've used before, but not very complicated, but not in this way. So that will be for a separate video, but I wanted to show it to you. It's really cool and makes the movement a little bit easier and, again, forgiving. You want these games to have, you want your games typically have forgiving controls because people are going to get frustrated if they keep running into walls or if they keep having to be pushed away or getting hit when they don't think they're getting hit, things like that. So anyway, that is Hotline Miami movement. Oh, one more thing. The sprites, if you might notice, there's actually two sprites for the movement here. The legs are its own separate sprite, and the upper body is its own separate sprite. So what's happening is one sprite is rotating as with the mouse, but the other sprite is dictated solely by my WASD. So anyone who's really trying to duplicate this, keep that in mind. These are two separate sprites happening here. So you might want to look into that. Maybe that's a video I can do in the future, how to have two sprites controlled for the player. Anyway, all right, let's get into the GameMaker and actually get some work done. So, what do we have here? We got sprites, objects, in rooms. We got our cursor, the wall, the zombie. We're going to have a zombie. I don't have the Hotline Miami guy. We have a zombie mask here, which we'll talk about a little bit. These scripts we are going to ignore for now. Object, cursor, wall, and zombie. Pretty straightforward. And a room. Give you an idea what the room looks like. Made it large so we can see ourselves moving around. There's our zombie. And there's some walls just to give us a little area to play around with. Okay, I do have views enabled, so this way it'll keep it at a small window and will scroll with us. Okay, so let's go over to, well, let's run the game first just to give you an idea what it looks like. I'll be honest with you, I should have read the script before I started doing this. I made it up a week ago, and it's been a while. So anyway, here it is. Similar to Hotline Miami, not perfect, but I do have the corner rolling thing in here. There it is. But I look around with the mouse, WASD to move. I don't have the fancy camera thing. The camera just follows the player. That might actually be desirable. The Hotline Miami camera thing has been criticized for giving people like nausea. I don't exactly enjoy it either, but it does help to be able to look out ahead if you move the cursor. So that's up to you if you want to do that. That is something that's doable. But this is what we're working with here, and let's go into how it works. So first and foremost, we want to talk about the player, the zombie. So we have a create or step in our draw events, and let's go to the, ooh, God, where am I going first? Let's go to the create. Just some variables in here. These, I try to fully comment everything, so when you get the project file, you can see exactly what's going on here. I have a speed for my zombie. I have, this is for our animation, and then this is for our speeds, our X speed and our Y speed. So, let's hop into it. So in our step event, this is going to happen every single time. We'll try to focus on the movement for now, and we'll do the animation a bit later. So these are our variables. We have our mouse direction, which is going to dictate where exactly the player is going to be facing. All right, it uses this function point direction, which will draw a line from where our avatar is, where our zombie is, to wherever the mouse is, and then take that line and measure its direction. So if, oops, forgot that. There we go. Screen size is a bit smaller. So what's going to happen is it draws this line from my player to the mouse, and then it'll measure that direction. So if the line happens to be going straight across, that's 0. If it's going straight up, it's 90, 180, 270, and then of course anywhere in between. So it'll take that and it spits out a number for us anywhere from 0 to 359. Rounding equals false. This is for, oh God, what is that for? I think that's for my rounding corners. I have to look at that again. Yes, it's for my rounding corners. That thing ended up being way more complicated than I thought, so that's definitely going to be a second video. Ignore that for now. So here are our keys: key up, left, down, right. There goes keyboard checks. They check to see if we're holding it. Notice I have no negatives in here. Everything is going to be registered as a positive. Okay. So here we go. This is our horizontal movement and our vertical movement. They're pretty much identical. The only difference is up and down versus left and right. But let's take a look and see what happens here. Typically what you guys do, and what I've shown you in the past, is you do a simple if check: if holding, if left, go left; if right, go right; if up, go up; if down, go down. But that is not ideal for the key rollover. So what we have here is we're checking to see if we're holding down the left key and not the right key. Okay, so left only and not the right key. If that's the case, then go ahead and move left. So we're only moving left if the left key is held down by itself. And then I have the opposite over here. If not left and right, then move right. So my two movement cases are basically hinging on the fact that only one key is being held at the same time. And I got this last if statement down here: if neither key is being held, then stop moving. So what this does is the situation in which you are moving left and then start to move right isn't in here. So what happens is the game just continues on as if continues doing what it was doing beforehand. So if you're holding down the left key and you press the right key, well, there is no situation where it's key left and key right. It just doesn't exist. So what the game does is says, oh, well, I don't know what you're doing, so I'm just going to keep doing what you're doing before, which in this case was, well, initially I held down the left key, so I'm going to move left. But then you start to hold down the right key. I don't know what that is, so I'm just going to keep moving left. And then as soon as I let go of left, then we'll switch over to, oh, hey, look, you're holding down the right key but not the left key, so we'll switch. It's kind of tough to explain without showing you a keyboard of what's going on, so you might want to play around with this a bit, but basically the gist is we only want to register left key only, right key only, or no keys whatsoever, because you do want to stop moving. And of course this is duplicated just for the up and down movement as well, even though I don't think, well, maybe some people do. Most people, I imagine, don't roll over W and S, but there could be. I've seen some pretty weird keyboard setups. I think it seemed like StarCraft players play with like vertical or something like that. It's very strange. Anyway, that's the movement. That takes care of your key rollover, your WASD stuff. Our collisions, there's really not much new here as opposed to what was done in the platformer tutorial. I basically just yanked that from here and I changed a couple things, mostly variables. I have this rounding thing here, which we'll talk about in the rounding video, but everything else is pretty much the same. So it checks to see if there's a wall in the way. If there is a wall in the way, get up right next to it and stop moving, or else just move. Okay. Same thing with your Y collision. If there's a wall, get as close to it as you can and stop moving, and then in all other cases, keep moving. So that's the movement stuff. And the movement stuff really is just the WASD. So this is the block of it right here. It's just this not even that complicated if statement. 3 if statements, that's it. And you're good to go. So next thing we're going to talk about is, when we covered collision, we want to talk about the mouse movement. Now, the mouse movement is a bit tricky. Well, what I have to do is I have to go into here. And mouse movement is basically controlled by this whole thing, this draw sprite extension. One of the things that you're going to come to realize about GameMaker is that the sprite, in fact, I'll do this right now. The sprite isn't ideal for a lot of things, so I'm going to change this to the wall. And I think if I run my game again, this should be true. So I changed the sprite of my zombie, but I'm still a zombie. The reason is that you want sometimes a little bit more control over what's being drawn on the screen. So what happens is you kind of ignore GameMaker's built-in use this sprite command, and you draw your own. Close this out. And that's being done here in the draw event. And there's this extension, this draw sprite extension. And if I middle click here, it'll show me what it's about. So it draws a sprite at a given position with customizable scaling, rotation, blend, and alpha. So we can declare a bunch of things in here. Oh, jeez. Stupid Windows. Can I make this smaller? Thanks. Let me get rid of this for now, too. Sorry, I'm all over the place. So we declare a sprite, the sub-image, which is basically which frame of animation we want shown, the x-coordinate, y-coordinate, how big or small, x and y factor, the rotation, which is going to be big for us, and then the color and the alpha, which we're not going to touch, but putting it to C white makes it display normally, but you can put in a different color there, and it'll blend the sprite to be something else. So if you put it in red, it would turn red. So it's good for, I don't know, power-ups, quick and easy way to change the color of your sprite if you are powered up. Alpha is basically how transparent the sprite is. So if you want something a little transparent, so you'd say you're doing, I don't know, ghosts or something, you put in some number between 0 and 1. 0 is completely transparent, so the thing's invisible basically. So 0.7, 0.5, something like that will give you a nice ghost effect if you're looking for it. So let's break down what's going on in here actually. I'm going to make this smaller. There we go. So we're going to draw the sprite zombie with the zombie frame, which I have, this is obviously a variable, and I'll talk about how that's going on. This is more the animation thing. But we're drawing the sprite zombie. We're drawing it right on top of our sprite. The scales are normal. I have a class coming in, and I hope I get this done beforehand. I saw someone at the door. And if you remember mouse direction before, this is my rotation. So whatever number is spit out from mouse direction is being used here to dictate which direction the sprite is going to be rotated. And something else I want to point out, if you look at my zombie, he is facing right. Try to keep your sprites all facing right because that is the 0 direction. So this way you don't have to do any fancy math. If you have this guy facing up, you're going to have to subtract 90 degrees every time. If he's facing left, you're going to have to subtract 180. So keep it simple and have your sprites facing right all the time. So this way you can just use the rotation straight up. So here's the rotation being dictated here, and then of course the color white for a default blend, and he is completely opaque. Right? Is that the right word? I hope so. Anyway, so this takes care of the drawing and the rotation, and then I just want to talk about this very quickly, the animation. This is the zombie frame. I had a little bit of trouble with this. I couldn't, because you're obviously looking for a number here, but if you put in a number, then nothing happens because it's the same frame over and over and over again. So I had to put a variable here. Variable, it varies, something changes. And then if I go back to my step event, you might have saw this at the bottom. This is the animation. So what happens here is if my, let me try and read this. Okay, so I have 3 different arguments here. Basically, it's checking to see if he's moving. All right, ignore this last bit here. That has to do with the rounding corners thing. But as long as his x speed isn't 0 or his y speed isn't 0, so he's moving, we're going to increase the frame. The reason this is a complicated number is because this is the speed. You got to play with the speed that you want him to be at. So what I did, and what you can do when you're trying to get your animation speeds down, is go to the preview, and you want to tweak this number until it's going the speed you want. So my room runs at 60 frames per second. I think it runs at 60. Either way. Obviously, I don't want him going that fast, so I can't just increase the frame by 1. 30 is okay. 15, I think, is what I ultimately went for. I'd like that speed. So what you do is you take this number 15, and with your zombie frame, I'm increasing it by 15 divided by the room speed. So, and this way, whatever your room speed is, whether it's 30 or whether it's 60, or if you made it 144 or 240, if you're really looking out for those, PC Master Race people who've got 240 hertz refresh rates, no matter what the room speed is, the animation will be consistent. So whatever that preview speed is over room speed will give you the increase. So what GameMaker does here is it divvies this up. So I have a 60, so it's 0.25. So what it does is every 4th frame, it goes to the next sub image. So because it's 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. Okay, we hit 1. Now I increase the frame. So basically, I'm going 1 every 4 frames here. If my room speed was 30, it would do it every 2nd frame, and it would still look the same. And then at the bottom here is if he's not moving, don't animate at all. So I think I covered everything. I felt like this one went on a little bit long. Yeah, I think that's it. I will put this project in the description. Let me know how this went. It has been a week, and I think I droned on this one. God, I'm paranoid. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Bye. It won't stop recording. My keyboard shortcuts don't work. Stop recording.